real quick, just a few things about Guy. He's the chief evangelist at Canva. It's an online design service, and you're going to tell us a little bit about that in a little bit. He also is a fellow at the Haas School of Business at Berkeley. He's also a brand ambassador for Mercedes-Benz. And previous to these roles, he was chief evangelist at Apple and a special advisor to the CEO of Motorola business unit of Google. He's written 15 books, some of which are The Art of Social Media and Enchantment. I like this book, and I like it because it's not really a memoir. It's not an autobiography.
No.
It's really a collection of stories.
Yes.
And from those stories, there are lessons that you feel entrepreneurs or fans of your writing might have something to take home. So we really could start anywhere. And where I am choosing to start, 1995, Michael Moritz,
Yes.
one of the founders of Sequoia Capital, one of the largest venture capital firms in the world, $14 trillion worth of value has been created by investments Sequoia has done, or companies that Sequoia has investments in. This gentleman calls you and asks you to interview to be the CEO of this startup company known as Yahoo. Guy, what happens?
At the time, my wife and I, we had one son who was about 2 years old. We were living in San Francisco, which is about an hour from where Yahoo was. And she was also in beta with our second son. And so I told Michael, I just don't want to drive 2 hours a day. I looked at the company's website. It was a directory of two people's favorite websites. I didn't see where the world-class team was, where the patent-pending curve-jumping paradigm-shifting technology was, the obvious revenue model. So I said, I don't even want to interview for that job. And I would have been the first adult at that company, probably. I probably would have gotten 5% of Yahoo. And through dilution and following rounds and all that, but that probably would have been worth $2 billion. And I mean, you're all from LA, so it might not mean much to you, but for most people, $2 billion here, $2 billion there, it adds up to real money after a while.
So if you were to make a short stack, and I'm going to guess you only have a short stack of regrets, this would rank where?
Monetarily, number one. That's for sure. I'm also the person who left Apple twice, and I turned Steve down with another job offer for a third time. So I figure that's about $300 million. So we're talking about $2.3 billion here. I bet none of your guests ever came up here and said, I blew $2.3 billion.
No, I can't say we've had that, Guy. But I think that's a good starting point, because the back of your book and in the foreword, you talk about sort of the three reasons why, or what you hope people would get from your book. And you talk about you wanted the reader to have a more joyous, productive, and meaningful life.
Yes.
So I'm guessing part of the decisions you made with this possible interview with Yahoo had to do with carefully weighing those three things.
No, I mean, listen, I was, 40 years old or whatever, and I didn't want to do the drive, and I didn't want to, mess up with my family. I mean, if you work for Yahoo, it is 2 hours, two and a half hours each day, and if it gets big, you have to go all over the world. So I really wanted to stay with my family. Of course, the irony is, let's say that I was living in Palo Alto when that call came. It would be I would have taken the interview. I mean, it might have been changed the arc of my life. But I can't tell you that I was so mature back then that I made this very, careful analysis of, well, if you do this, you won't be around when your children, blah, blah, blah. I'm not a saint, okay? I wasn't that smart. But now with hindsight, if you walk away from $2 billion, you ought to get something out of it. So, at least you have to rationalize, well, at least I was there with my family. How's that?
So what you're saying is earlier in your life, joyous and meaningful was probably not priorities, more productive.
It was, well, I had to make money. I mean, I had to provide for my family, and I still feel that way. However, that said, today I'm chief evangelist of a company called Canva, and we just closed a round with Mary Meeker from Kleiner Perkins, Kleiner Perkins is arguably as good or better than Sequoia. And Canva was the first investment from her mezzanine stage fund, and the post-money valuation was $2.5 billion. I won't tell you what percentage of Canva I own, but let's just say that I can buy as many surfboards as I want pretty soon. So it kind of all evens out. At the start of my career, I was very fortunate to be affiliated with the Macintosh division of Apple. At the end of my career, I'm very proud to be affiliated with Canva. And so it's the middle. That was the problem. So I've been very fortunate. Mazel tov, as we say in Japan.
Right. So let's go back to the beginning. You have an entire chapter in the book dedicated to the immigrant tradition.
Yes.
and lessons from your family.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so basically, I'm Sansei, third generation Japanese American. My grandparents and great grandparents from Japan came over to Hawaii to pick sugar cane. And part of the reason why I went so heavy into immigration and all that was that this book was written in 2016, and let's just say the handwriting was on the wall. And I wanted to clearly establish the fact that America is great because of immigration. And so I definitely went on record. Back channel story to that was that in November of 2016, as a Mercedes brand ambassador, I had to go to Berlin. And I met some friends in Germany, 40, 45-year-old friends, and they said, Guy, to this day we wonder how our grandparents stood by, what did they do? How come Hitler took over Germany? They can't understand how they could let someone like that take over their country. And they said to me, Guy, it's 1930 in America right now. And so you have to understand that someday, do you want your grandchildren asking, Grandpa, did you resist Trump? And I felt so convicted after that I came back and it was like, I flipped the switch and I went all in for Hillary. When Trump won, I just became, if you look at my social media feed, it is just one big anti-Trump social media feed. Because my grandchildren will not be wondering if I resisted. I guarantee you. And that's very important to me. I guess we're not in Alabama, tonight.
No. So let's go to the beginning when you finished high school. Yep. And you actually almost considered a college right here in Los Angeles to go to undergrad, correct? Occidental, and then you decided to go.
I didn't want to be president. I just wanted to be chief evangelist.
and then you chose to go to Stanford. Why Stanford?
Well, so I don't remember what other schools I got into, but this is 1972, and I got into Oxy, University of Hawaii, and Stanford. And in Hawaii, in high school, I loved to play football. Now, obviously, I'm not that big in anything. So I could never play in a D1 school, but Oxy asked me, So I was so flattered I could play football at Oxy. I wanted to go to Oxy because I loved football. And basically, I said to my father, I want to go to Oxy, not Stanford. And he said, I'm going to spend all that money sending you to college on the mainland. You're going to Stanford, or you can go to University of Hawaii. And so, me being intelligent, Stanford, here I come, baby. So that's why. That's literally why. If it was up to me, I would have gone to Occidental. Maybe I would have been Barack Obama. I doubt it, but
So you've mentioned President Obama. You mentioned Hillary Clinton. Have you ever had a bug for politics? Or?
Well, my father was a state senator in Hawaii for 22 years or so. And that cured me of any interest in politics. I saw what dedication it took, what time away it took from your family. I saw that it's not very well compensated unless you're a crook. So that has no appeal to me. You may find this hard to believe, but I am an introvert. I'm fundamentally an introvert. This kind of role right here and right now is thrust upon me, and it's one that I can do. I speak publicly 50 to 75 times a year. But in a perfect world, I am perfectly happy to be anonymous and just being left alone. And I don't need the attention and all that. I don't really prefer it. I was, before this event, I got here early for once in my life. And so I was next door at a place called Bondi Beanery or Bondi something. And so I'm just sitting outside eating and just checking my text messages. And this guy walks by and says, "Aren't you Guy Kawasaki?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, I read your book and all that." And he started a company that sells a little kit for, believe it or not, matcha, for green tea ceremony. So he goes into his office, brings me out a kit for green tea, and I'm Japanese, but I'm a Lipton kind of guy. And it's not like I'm spending hours whisking the tea and, turning the bowl and presenting it. Just Arnold Palmer, that's my main drink. But that's, listen, don't get me wrong. It's fun to be recognized. My kids are always impressed when that happens. But I don't need it.
You always get recognized as Guy Kawasaki?
Not always. So that's a very good lead-in. So I have two good stories from the book. So the nature of this book is it's full of stories like I'm about to tell you. Each one has some wisdom at the end, okay? So story number one is about 15 years ago, I had a Porsche 911. So I was smug as a bug in a rug. And I pull up to a stoplight. I look to my left. There's a car with 4 teenage girls. And they're giggling and laughing and smiling and making eye contact with me. And I think, "Guy, you have truly arrived," right? So even teenage girls know who you are, Guy. It's because of your work at Apple, your books, your writing, your speeches, your .com company, whatever it is, right? So the girl in the front seat says, "Roll down the window." I roll down the window. She sticks her head out and says, "Are you Jackie Chan?" So now you say, what the hell? What's the wisdom in that? And the wisdom is that, don't be proud about what motivates you. Because ever since that day, my goal is that someday Jackie Chan is in his S-Class, or Bentley, or Rolls. 4 teenage girls in Hong Kong, or wherever the hell he lives, roll down Jackie Chan's window, and girl sticks out her head and says, "Are you Guy Kawasaki?" You got to have goals in life. Another story along those lines is, many times, about once a month or so, somebody comes up to me and says, "Your book changed my life. Your book changed my life. I was lost. I didn't have direction. I didn't know what to do with my life." And I say, "Well, which one of my 15 awesome books are you talking about? Can you narrow it down?" And every time the person says, "Rich Dad, Poor Dad." And I tell you, that is just the freaking funniest thing in the world. And I say, I'm Poor Dad, Poor Dad. I'm Kawasaki. That's Kiyosaki. We look alike and we sound alike. I mean, And I know Robert Kiyosaki, so yeah, that happens all the time. So I hope someday somebody goes up to him and says, "Oh, you know, your book changed my life. Which book was it? Wise Guy." No, I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Guy, tell us. So you after Stanford, you came to UCLA to do your MBA.
Well, I went to law school for 2 weeks, but yeah.
Right, but I was going to get to that. But why did you back out of law school?
I hated law school.
Well, okay, then why did you think you needed to go to law
Because
school?
my father, I'm third generation Japanese American, and back then, this is the late 70s, if you're an Asian American, your parents wanted you to be doctor, lawyer, or dentist. And at Stanford, I took a course where you walked around Stanford Hospital on rounds, you know, and the first day of the class, I fainted. Well, there goes medicine. And I thought, do you want to stick your hand in people's mouths for the rest of your life? So there goes dentistry. So all that was left was law. And so I went to law school. My father had never gone to college, but he was a state senator. So, you know, he made laws, but he never went to college or got a JD. So it was kind of his dream that I, you know, first generation, go to college, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I just could not stand it. I mean, basically, law school's approach is, you know, you're crap, we're going to remake you. And my ego was too fragile at that moment to handle that. I've gotten over that. But, yeah, and I learned a very valuable lesson then, too, because when I called up my parents, I thought I was going to get disowned. My last name would be Kiyosaki today. And, but my father, to my utter amazement, said, you know, son, it's okay. You just don't waste your life, you know, make something of your life by your mid-20s or something like that. And I never loved my father more than at that moment. I also wanted to know, well, why the hell did you make me go to law school in the first place then? But that was a different discussion. So yeah, most people that I know who are lawyers, you know, have been in law for 20, 30 years and they hate it. I figured that out in 2 weeks.
At UCLA,
Yeah.
When you graduated, you did not go the route of
Most
some
MBA,
of most of
yes,
MBA
yes.
students. You know, tell us where you went, why
Yeah.
you went there.
So, UCLA's MBA program back then, and maybe it's still true, it was a 4-day-a-week program. So you had Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And I came from a lower middle class family, so it's not like, you know, they paid someone to take my SATs and Photoshop my body on the crew, you know, team or anything like that, or donated a building. So I had to make money. So I took a job working part-time because I met a woman from Hawaii, and she said they needed help at this Los Angeles-based fine jewelry manufacturer down on Hill Street. And so on Fridays, I used to go and I used to count diamonds, like literally count diamonds. And after I graduated, I went to work for them in sales and marketing and stayed there for 5 years. While all my other friends went to, you know, Lehman Brothers and Accenture, Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo and, you know, all these other places. I went to a family-owned jewelry manufacturer in downtown LA. And honestly, the jewelry business is one built on trust and relationships and your reputation. And I learned how to sell in the jewelry business. And I mean really hand-to-hand combat, carrying a bag, schlepping your bag into a store, getting rejected, people telling you your designs are crap, we'll give you 5% over scrap gold value. I mean, it was a tough, tough business. So, you know, when people say, oh, I'm struggling with my A/B testing of our web page, we don't know if the blue links are better than the green links. Like, get the violin out. I mean, you've never been told to get the hell out of a store. It was a great training for the rest of my life, for selling.
And after that experience, where did you go?
After
The jewelry.
After the jewelry business?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I saw a computer. I saw a Macintosh. I mean, I saw an Apple II. I loved Apple II. The whole, you know, it's hard to explain that now, but back then, if you were an undergrad at Stanford and you were writing term papers, you hired a typist or you typed yourself, and if you were really at the cutting edge of technology, you had an IBM Selectric correctable typewriter, which meant it had a little white roll of tape that was sticky, and so when you made a mistake, the tape could lift off the ink. That was corrections, okay? And so to go from a typewriter to an Apple II was like an earth-shattering experience for me. So I loved computers. I wanted to get in the computer business. And I interviewed at Apple, but there was a job there that just wasn't right. I didn't get that, but I still wanted to get in the computer business. And so I just cold called 20 or 25 companies. I got rejected by all of them. And then I decided I wasn't going to be stopped, so I went to Comdex. And at Comdex, I came upon a small software company out of Agoura Hills, where their sales manager, driving from Agoura Hills to Las Vegas, got in a car accident. And it was going to be a long recovery. So they were short a salesperson. So I talked myself into working for a small educational software company in Agoura Hills called Eduware Services. So I stayed in that company for about 6 months, and then a very large company from Atlanta, Georgia, bought it, called Peachtree. Peachtree was part of MSA, Management Science America. And so now they bought Eduware, and they wanted to relocate Eduware to Atlanta. So they fly me to Atlanta. And I tell you something, so every street in Atlanta is named Peachtree. Like literally every street. And you know, their idea of sushi is a bait shop. And I could not see working in Atlanta. And then I got a second interview at Apple, and that was for software evangelist, and that's the job that I got. Really, you know, the reason why I got hired at Apple was not because of my educational background, which was psych, because that was the easiest major I could find. And it wasn't because of my work experience, because my work experience was counting and selling diamonds. It was, in one single word, nepotism. Basically, my Stanford College roommate hired me into the Macintosh division. So it was purely unadulterated nepotism. It's kind of like Ivanka. So anyway, except I delivered in my job. And so the lesson that I learned there was that, you know, it's not how you get the job, whether it's nepotism, family connections, qualifications, or lack of qualifications. It's what you do once you get the job. And so I don't like shade the truth. I'm telling you, it was nepotism. And I'm not proud of that, but I'm not ashamed of it because it's what I did after I got the job that really counts.
There's a page in the book where you list all the jobs you've had, and
how I got them,
and then how you got them.
Yeah.
And it's friend, nepotism, friend.
We're seeing a trend here.
Right.
Yeah.
So, which is not bad. I mean, you position yourself. You know people. People get to know you for who you are and feel comfortable recommending you. So
that's the good news.
That's the good news.
Yeah.
How do you pass that lesson on to other people? I mean, there's lots of people out there in the workforce looking to do things, looking to advance. How do you position yourself for that?
So what he's talking about is I've had, 5 or 8 jobs in my whole career, and almost every one of them was friend or connection. None of them was because my educational work experience popped up on a resume, AI program and just blared out, hire this guy. And I think that's a very valuable lesson, that it's all about either who you know or who knows you. It's not about necessarily, your resume or your LinkedIn profile. Now, having said that, I truly believe you should make your LinkedIn profile as good as it can be. But I don't think it's as simple as, people are going to look at my Wharton degree and my experience at Goldman Sachs and figure out that I walk on water. Which is another way of saying, be nice to your peers and your colleagues. I have an extreme example of this, which is, believe it or not, I gave Mark Benioff his first job. And so I was at Apple, and Mark Benioff was at USC. Yeah. He wasn't on the crew team or soccer team either, but so he was at USC, and I gave him his first summer job as an assembly language programmer. And fast forward, and Mark Benioff is co-founder of Salesforce, right? Billionaire, and so the lesson there is be nice to your interns. You just not even more funny. So Mark Benioff comes from a part of California called Hillsborough. So it's Hillsborough, California. It's right near the airport in SFO. It's a very upscale. It's kind of like, Brentwood. That kind of. And so Mark Benioff is large, ample, and white. And so we used to call him the Hillsborough Doughboy in honor of the Pillsbury Doughboy. So the Hillsborough Doughboy is now the man. Yeah. And I'll tell you something, 30 years later or something, I reached out for Mike Boych is the person who hired me at Apple. I reached out for his son to help his son get a job interview at Salesforce. And a couple years later, I reached out for my son. And Mark Benioff, within 1 hour of both of those emails, took care of it. I mean, he did not have to do that. There are many billionaires who would have never even acknowledged that email. He took care of it. So he is the man. Every night I salute. Yeah.
Real quick, I want to talk about the title Chief Evangelist.
Yes.
It's sort of like head of sales. It's sort of like head of business development, but it's sort of not.
Yeah.
Tell me,
What is
what is that, and
Yeah.
what does like the CEO of the companies you've worked for expect of you? What is your responsibility in this role?
Yeah, so evangelism comes from Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So if you're a religious evangelist or a Christian evangelist, you're bringing the good news of eternal life if you follow the teachings of Christ. So what a secular evangelist does is believe that his or her product is good news. So with Macintosh, I believed that Macintosh was good news, that it would make people more creative or productive. At Canva, I believe that Canva is democratizing design so that every one of you can make beautiful designs roughly in the time it would take you to boot Photoshop. And so what a secular evangelist does is spread the good news of a product or service. What distinguishes an evangelist from just typical sales is that an evangelist also has the other person's best interests at heart. So if I tell you to use Canva, it's good for me, don't get me wrong, but it's also because I truly do believe Canva will enable you to make great graphics that will increase your communication skills. And if I tell you to use Macintosh, it's because I truly do believe it'll make you more creative and productive. Whereas sales would say, I got to make my bonus, I need to hit quota, so buy a Macintosh or sign up for Canva. So that's the difference.
We could do an entire interview on the Apple days and Steve Jobs.
Yes,
so,
we could, yes.
I'd like to hear what your worst day at Apple was like.
I didn't have any worse days, to tell you the truth. Are you asking about that story I have in the book? Or,
Yeah.
Okay. But that wasn't a worse day. That was just a normal day. Which is, illustrative of something right there. So one day I'm in my cubicle working, and Steve Jobs shows up with someone I'd never met. And he asked me what I thought of a company. And I told him the company was mediocre product, drill in practice, doesn't take advantage of the Macintosh graphics, et cetera, not strategic for us as a product or a company. And then Steve says, I want you to meet the CEO of the company. So that's what it was like. You had to pass the Steve Jobs test every day. Everything you've read and heard and seen about Steve Jobs is true. He was tough. He was difficult. He was arrogant. But that was the best experience of my life. I mean, I've come to believe that the best bosses and the best teachers are the ones that were the hardest on you, not the easiest. The best coaches, mentors, all those people. So that's two things. So one is, if you are the mentee or the student, it may take you 20 years to figure this out, but you should appreciate the people who are the hardest on you. And if you are the mentor or teacher, you should also appreciate that softening up and trying to be all touchy-feely and not telling the truth and all that, not providing true, honest feedback, you're doing a disservice to the person. If somebody has crap, you should tell them it's crap, as hard as that may be.
Let's talk about the times you quit or you threatened to quit at Apple.
Yeah. Must we? I have PTSD after that, but if you feel comfortable bringing it up, it's your show. Well, so both times basically I quit to start companies, and because I believed in first the Macintosh market, so I started a Macintosh company. Second time I believed in the .com revolution, so I started a .com company. And it is what it is. It's not like I lay awake at night thinking about it, but it was hundreds of millions of dollars. Sorry.
So when
Canva.
when I emigrated to the U.S.,
yes.
my
From
uncle
where?
went from Ethiopia. My uncle,
You're from Ethiopia?
Yeah.
Wow.
My uncle went to Stanford.
Yeah.
I came up to the Bay Area, and I remember the trip to Stanford,
Yeah.
because that's where he wanted me to go to school. He was an engineer. He got his PhD.
Yeah.
And he talked about how the first day he got an interview at IBM, when he got that job, and how he worked there his entire career.
Yeah.
Now, that kind of career track is not where we are
Non-existent.
today. So
Yeah.
a lot of people, many entrepreneurs in the room, you're confronted with taking a job, how long do you stay at the job, when do you leave, do you leave too soon? Give us some wisdom about when to leave,
Well,
when to stay.
I guess I don't know if I have wisdom in like a statistically valid method, right? I can just tell you.
What worked for you?
Well, what worked for me, what worked and didn't work for me is I probably quit too early rather than quit too late. And so I think many people, they try to optimize short term they job hop. Every time the grass looks greener, they change jobs. If I look back on my career, if I had stayed at Apple the first time or the second time, I'd be in a very different place. And so sometimes I'm not saying that this is never quit a job, but I am saying that sometimes rather than looking for greener grass, you should make the grass you're standing on greener. Might be a better path. So at least consider the fact that you shouldn't always jump ship. If you go through life always trying to optimize every short-term decision, I think in the long run, it'll be a suboptimal result.
So tell us today, you, Chaya Day, had developed a marketing plan and a video for the Think Different campaign, and Steve said...
Yeah, so Chaya Day came in and showed us the Think Different ad campaign. And we loved it. It was the Einstein, Gandhi, all this kind of stuff, Martin Luther King stuff. And at the end of this, the Chaya Day guy says, well, I have 2 copies of the videos here. I'll give one to you, Steve, and I'll give one to Guy. And Steve says, and I'm sitting there, and there's like 20 other people, marketing people, and Steve says, don't give one to Guy. Okay, and then I said, so Steve, is it because you don't trust me? And Steve said, yes. So I said, it's okay, Steve, because I don't trust you either. So that was a $150 million argument, but that has felt so good. I got to tell you, man, that was worth it. Sticking up for the man, yeah, that was.
Why do you think he didn't want you to see it?
How the hell do I know? I mean, Steve, it's not that Steve was, well, I have to invent a word. So in a sense, you know how there's moral, immoral, and amoral? Well, there's polite, impolite, and apolite. Steve was apolite. He wasn't polite. And it wasn't impolite in the sense that he was just a stark, raving, lunatic asshole. That was his operating system. That's how it was. I mean, if he thought if you were shit, he told you were shit. It never occurred to him, it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't tell someone he's shit to his face or her face in front of other people. It wasn't part of his operating system. So he wasn't evil or anything. That was just the way he was. So you just have to accept that. Now, having said that, the reason why he could get away with that, he was such a visionary and genius. Now, you could have a somewhat philosophical discussion of if you're a genius, can you get away with being an asshole, or does being an asshole cause you to be a genius? It's a heavy discussion. But I would say that one of the dangers of people going into Steve Jobs emulation mode is you think, okay, so I'm going to wear a black mock turtleneck, buy 501s, New Balance, black Mercedes. I'm not going to register it because the license plates affects the aesthetics of the car. And this means I have to buy a new Mercedes every 6 months because I guess that's the limit with the California DMV. And I'm going to drive that Mercedes in the carpool lane because I am Steve Jobs. And I'm going to park it in the handicap slot. And so people look at all that and, they go buy the black mock turtleneck, the jeans, the Mercedes, they park in the handicap spot, they drive in the carpool lane. And they think, I'm the next Steve Jobs. No, you're not. You're just an asshole. So, that's how it was. There's good and bad from Steve Jobs, as there is in everybody, and you should emulate the good stuff, not necessarily, I don't think it was necessary to be like that to be successful.
I'd love to spend a lot more time on Apple and Steve, but so let's just do a couple more items on that.
Okay.
The Gospel according to Steve, you list 11 or 12 items of key things you learned from your days at Apple. I picked 2 I'd like you to talk about, and I want you to pick one more. Changing your mind is a sign of intelligence.
Yeah. So I think many people think that changing your mind is a sign of weakness and stupidity, i.e. you made a mistake. I would say that what I learned from Steve is that although he wasn't wrong very often, but when he was wrong, he did change his mind. And he did do it publicly. So when the iPhone was introduced, it was a closed system, closed architecture. The only way you could add functionality to an iPhone was the Safari plugin. A year later, opens it up, you can write native apps for iOS. Total reversal. So it's a very valuable lesson. And if Steve Jobs can change his mind and admit he was wrong, so can you.
Any examples you can give us of you changing your mind?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not implying that I never made a mistake. My problem is that changing the mistakes I made were not exactly reversible. I couldn't say, okay, let's undo my quitting of Apple. I couldn't exactly call Michael Moritz 2 years later and say, yeah, I'll take that job now. I got a noodle about that. I've never been asked that. There must have been times I made mistakes and didn't reverse myself. Maybe I just haven't made those kind of heavy decisions. I was going to name this book. I had 2 names for this book before we settled on Wise Guy. So this is an admission of mistake. So seriously, in a sense, the book is like chicken soup for the soul, where there's short stories with wisdom attached to each one. So first I told my publisher, I want to call it miso soup for the soul. And they didn't go for that. And then I wanted to call it Are You Jackie Chan? But they didn't want to go for that too, so I admitted my mistakes, and it's called Wise Guy. So how's that?
Okay, the other one I picked is Design Counts. Tell us a little bit more about sort of Steve's obsession about design.
Yeah, Steve
and how
was
that
obsessed
filtered down.
with design, and he would tell you, well, this floor isn't black enough. I want a deeper shade of black. Like, what the hell are you talking about, Steve? And so, just designing the Macintosh user interface and the icons, poor Susan Kerr, just driving everybody crazy. But he was that kind of person. And I don't know if he was, I'm not saying he was, there are people like that who just do it just to flex their power, right? I don't think that was it with him. He really had a sense of what was good and bad and right and wrong. And that's something that to this day amazes me, that, if you look at many products to this day, they're just crap, right? They're just so ugly. Like, what were they thinking? And it's not because of a lack of money, it's because of a lack of taste. And so what Steve Jobs had was taste. And it's hard to, look at some of the products in particular, look at some of the cameras. I mean, if you look at some of those cameras in the UI, like, it's as if they sat down and said, how can we make this as lousy as we can in user interface? Like, I don't understand it. I really. Now, there's some stuff with Apple today that just makes me crazy too. So, it's a challenge.
Wait, let's do one more. Engineers or artists?
Yes, I believe engineers are artists. That they're not. You don't measure an engineer by lines of code per day. I think they're creating art. Their art happens to be a compiler, or their tool, their palette is a compiler. I love the idea of engineers as artists as opposed to, factory workers, automation. Yeah.
There's a chapter in here titled Values, and that's where you first talk about Benioff. There are two other very well-recognized names you bring up in that chapter, Steve Case and Richard Branson.
Yes.
Two very separate stories. Let's hear those.
Okay, so Steve Case, Steve Case had a company called Quantum Computing, which was building something called, it was called Apple Link Public Edition. So Apple Link was an internal email system for Apple employees. Apple had the foresight to figure, maybe more than just employees want this, so we'll make an Apple Link that people could use without having to be an employee. So he was working on that, and then I happened to be with him and his team the night that Apple blew up that contract. And so they were totally depressed because basically their only customer just said, we're rescinding the contract. And I pointed out, they may have just done you a favor because inside of Apple, you'd be stuck. You'd be, constrained by what you could do. You could only support Apple, not Windows. There's like a lot of things if you're an Apple-labeled product that you cannot do. And so I said, maybe they did you a favor. And then he said, so why don't you do some consulting for us and also do some online conferences? So I said, okay, let's do that. So I did that for a while. And after a while, they stopped calling me for help, and I stopped doing conferences. And I don't know, 2 or 3 years later, I see him at a conference. Steve Case says, are you still doing work for us? I said, no, kind of faded out. And he said, well, are we still paying you? I said, no, but I'm not doing anything. He said, did we ever give you stock? I said, no, but, I haven't really done that much lately, so don't worry about it. But he said, no, I promise you stock. I'm going to give you stock. So I think he gave me 2,000 options. You know the story in the Bible about the loaves of bread and fishes? That's AOL stock for me. So he gave me 2,000 shares back then, which, split and IPO and all this. It became worth a lot of money. And he did that. He didn't have to do it. I would have never said anything else about that, but the 2,000 shares was a huge deal for me. Huge deal. And he did it purely out of honor.
Tell us about the Richard Branson story.
The Richard Branson story, there's several. So is it the one about being in Moscow with him?
Polishing your shoes.
Yeah, okay. So Richard and I are in Moscow making a speech, and he comes up to me in the speaker ready room, and he asked me if I'm a Virgin flyer. And I said, nah, Richard, I'm United Airlines Global Services, and when you're Global Services at United, in case you didn't know, even United is a good airline. And so that's how good it is. And so I said, Richard, I don't want to risk my global service level. And at that moment, he just got down on his knees and he started polishing my shoes with his jacket. And I thought, well, so this guy, he owns an island, he's a billionaire, he's a knight, Barack Obama kite surfs with him, and he's on his knees polishing my shoes. So that's when I started flying Virgin America. It was that moment. It was remarkable. And you could say, okay, so he was doing it for you guy, he wouldn't do it for anybody else. But my sense of the man is he would have done it for anybody else. I was very impressed by that.
There's something I liked. I wish all of us could be. I'm going to use the word lucky, but maybe it's have the good fortune. It seems to me in reading your book and various aspects of your career, good things sort of happen to you.
Oh, I mean, other than quitting Apple twice and Yahoo, yeah.
Right, but like how you joined Canva, how you started evangelizing for Mercedes.
Yeah. Why?
Well, how do these things happen? Do you
Well,
serendipity, luck?
all of the above. Serendipity, luck, and I also hope karma. I'm a big believer in karma. And I like to, and I hate saying this publicly because I like to default to yes. So generally my attitude towards people asking me to do stuff is yes until proven no. Most people has no until proven yes. So I generally like to help people, and I believe that there's a karmic scoreboard. And so I've helped so many people without expectation of repayment, or even if I could ever be repaid or whatever. So I guess, there's a karmic scoreboard. And I also, one of my recommendations to you all is whenever you're asked something, just say yes. Just, well, tomorrow I'm meeting with a company called Surfline. And if you're a surfer, you know what Surfline is. It has 500 cameras around the world, and they show you surfing breaks in real time. And so they basically reached out and they said, we see that you use Surfline, come meet with us. And my response is, sure, why not? What the hell? I mean, you never know. And so I always say yes, and then something always, not always, but often comes out of that. And so I just encourage you to, take this positive, the rising tide floats all boats, and life is not a zero-sum game. I think that, the world can be divided into two kinds of people, bakers and eaters. So an eater says, wow, limited pie. I got to eat as much of the pie as fast as possible because if you eat more, I eat less. That's an eater. A baker says, I can bake another pie. Everybody can have more pie. I'm a baker, and I default to yes. And that's my modus operandi. And knock on wood, it's worked out all right. I'm not a chicken shit kind of guy. I mean, really.
A couple other things you said that I just say a few comments about that. Sometimes you work for free.
Yes.
It says sometimes you work for free.
I work for free often. So part of being defaulting to yes and all that is, I tell the story. I had a book called Enchantment, and I love crowdsourcing stuff. I love tapping people's imagination that it's not like a handful of people can design book covers. I think just lots of people could design book covers, so why not tap it? So I ran a contest where you design a cover, submit it to me, and I'll pick a winner. And so it's in the book, but I think about 750 people submitted designs. Now, I look at it like, okay, 750, I paid $1,000, and I created a true level, meritocracy playing field. You didn't have to work for an agency. I didn't care about your MFA or whatever. Just submit the design. And so I thought, well, I'm giving one person a chance, right? But if you're a professional graphic designer, this is like a heinous thing because it's exploitation. 749 people created designs for nothing. One made $1,000. And so this is kind of spec work that I made 749 people. I exploited 749 people. And so I think that's a very interesting case that, I can't think of another industry that thinks like that. So, I make 50 paid speeches a year. I probably make 50 free speeches a year. When I was starting in my speaking career, I made almost all free speeches, right? But my theory is the more I speak, the more I speak. And so, odds are tonight, one of you, you work for some large firm down here. Maybe you work for Toyota or something, or I don't know, some whatever, large company down here. And you say, oh, guy, you're a reasonably cogent, intelligent person. Maybe you can come speak at our company, at our, Toyota. I actually can't because I'm a Mercedes-Benz brand ambassador, but, you put that aside. And so this will probably generate a lead. So my attitude is, I've had to speak for free in order to speak for money. Programmers participate in hackathons. They don't make money from hackathons, but you might get discovered in a hackathon, right? And so musicians play for free. Artists paint for free. I mean, I think you have to do whatever it takes to get noticed, and sometimes it's for free. And I've done it, and so, that was the wisdom. Sometimes you just have to do stuff or you have to do what it takes.
Stories trump adjectives?
Oh, I focus on the word Trump there. What the hell? As a former VC, and still today, I get pitched every day. And most pitches, no matter what, it could be dog food online to green tea, whatever it is, it always comes down to something like patent pending, curve jumping, paradigm shifting, innovative, revolutionary product or service. Every one of them comes down to that. And so my contention is that since everyone comes down to that, it's all meaningless. Right? So if 99.9% of people pitch you and say, my product is a piece of crap that cannot scale, cannot meet the needs of our customers, poorly documented, hard to use and buggy, and then you come and say, oh, patent pending, curve jumping, paradigm shifting, bug free, easy to use. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll deal with you. But everybody says they're great. So I think that all these adjectives are meaningless because nobody says we have crap. So I think that a story is much more powerful. So the story of Canva is that the two co-founders in university, Western Australia, Perth of all places, the Silicon Valley of Australia. So they're in Perth and they're teaching undergraduate students how to do graphics, and they figure out, my God, Photoshop and Illustrator is too expensive and too hard. There must be a better way. That was the genesis of Canva. That's a, I think, much better story than saying, well, Canva is a patent-pending, curve-jumping, paradigm-shifting, online, cloud-based graphic design service. The story is better. Pierre Maillard, the founder of eBay, tells a story that he created eBay because his girlfriend at the time was a toy collector. She collected Pez dispensers. She wanted to sell Pez dispensers online. There was no way, so he created eBay. That's a much better story than patent pending, curve jumping, paradigm shifting, market clearing, supply and demand, intersection, curve, place. So, by the way, that eBay story is total bullshit. They invented that story afterwards, but still, can't let the truth get in the way of good marketing. So, my contention is that a great story is a more powerful way to explain, why did you create Canva? Was and jobs, they're frustrated. They're like, dropouts, and they can't use a computer unless they, sneak into the Stanford Library, or they go to work for NASA, or they go to work for HP. So why can't computers be smaller and cheaper and easier to use? So we created Apple. What a great story. That's like a great story. I think stories are the way to go. Absolutely. Now, just so you understand, that's if you're selling, okay? If you're buying, you have to beware of stories because one story doesn't make a company or a trend. And so when somebody says, XYZ thinks that this is the greatest product and they're using it in this way, they may be the only company that's doing that. So when you're buying and you hear a story, you have to be a little more skeptical. But when you're selling, story is a great way. So to wit, I'll tell you a funny story from my Apple days. So when Macintosh first came out in 1984, it was positioned as a knowledge workers, Fortune 500 MIS kind of product, a business computer. And so inevitably in all these interviews, the reporter would ask, well, what Fortune 500 or 1,000 company is using Macintosh? And we would sort of stare up at the ceiling and like cogitate for a while as if we're trying to narrow it down because there's so many examples. Like, which example should I tell this reporter from Forbes about? But really, there was only one example. It was Pete Marwick. So Pete Marwick was buying Macintoshes so all its auditors could carry a computer on site and do spreadsheets for their audits. So Pete Marwick was the only large company that had committed to buying Macintosh. But we hemmed and hawed as if we had such a problem narrowing it down from all the companies. And so that's the story, that I call that story Pete Marwick, for example.
Before we go to questions from the audience, one of your earlier books was on social media.
Yes.
Okay, how do you feel about social media today, some of the criticisms Facebook has been getting versus when you wrote the book?
I think that social media is a great thing. It is fast, it is free, it is ubiquitous. It is not without danger and abuse. Having said that, on two levels, I believe any discussion about this is largely theoretical because we are not going to put that genie back in the bottle. We're not going to no longer have social media. So why even discuss that? That horse, to use another metaphor, that horse has left the barn and is procreating in the wild. So that's one issue. And the second issue is that I think that, yes, it's abuse. There are bad things that have been done with it. But, can any of us imagine a world without social media? Would you want a world without social media? Seriously. I wouldn't. And so, Facebook and all this kind of stuff. Well, one part of me says, well, you know what? If it's privacy and all that, nobody's forcing you to use Facebook. If you don't want to use Facebook, don't use Facebook. But don't complain and use it. Don't use it. It's not like I'm aligned with Facebook and I agree with all their policies, but I also see the point that, you don't have to use Facebook. If you don't like it, don't use it. So I am thumbs up on this. I think it is enormous power, enormous good has come of it. And think of all the GoFundMe things that happen and the crowdsourcing and the crowdfunding. And I know I have many, many more relationships and friends because of social media. I don't know, maybe the whole world, the quote whole world is anti-social media, but I love social media. I don't care. Elizabeth Warren might not like it, but I do. I think it's great.
All right, that's a good time to take some questions from the audience.
Okay,
Just
fire away.
Quick reminder, questions at Live Talks LA typically start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short.
What?
Yes.
A W or a?
W or an H.
Like Y or
sometimes
how?
a D. Correct.
And what's D?
Do you?
Oh, okay.
Please,
dumbass.
Please, no two-part questions, and tonight, no stories or pitches. Darlene has the microphone.
Has surfing been something significant in your life?
Oh my God, yeah. There's another lesson there. So at 44, I took up ice hockey, which is not advisable. It's roughly 40 years too late. And I took it up because my sons took it up. And then at 62, my daughter really got into surfing, so I took up surfing. Also not advisable. 58 years too late. And I love surfing. Surfing is the most enjoyable thing you can legally do in the world. I just love surfing. I surfed this morning. If I ever default to yes and meet with you, you will see that I will never meet with you when the tide is right for good surfing. So I kid you not. When someone says, "Can you meet on this day?" You know what the first thing I check is? The tide chart. The tide chart. So I surf 4 or 5 times a week. I surfed this morning. I had a decision, should I drive or fly to LA, and I flew so that I could surf. I take time off from surfing to work. I don't know, how many of you surf in this audience? See, these are the happy people. I highly recommend you try surfing, and it's a great. There's nothing, I've never tried to learn something more difficult than surfing. Surfing is a very difficult sport to learn. I thought hockey was hard, surfing is harder.
Question in the back?
Yeah, if you were starting your career in today's day and age, what would you do differently, and what would you do the same from what you did?
Well, I wouldn't quit Apple, but I think with my education and my career, I wish I had more of an engineering background. Not because I necessarily want to be an engineer, but I wish I had more of an intellectual basis by which to know that engineers are bullshitting me. Which is basically when their lips are moving. But so I wish I could have a little bit more engineering background so I could tell, bullshit on an engineer. Having said that, I don't know. I don't have lots of regrets. Listen, I'm 65 years old. 65, you just don't have to give a shit anymore, man. I can't tell you, I'm not applying for any more jobs the rest of my life. The most important people to me in my life are my 4 kids and my wife, and that's it. After my 4, you will appreciate this. After your 4 kids and your wife, the most important person in my life is my shaper. Because he determines how much fun I have surfing, so.
Real quick about your family. No.
Wait, I have one more thought. So, one other piece of wisdom I'd like to offer you from the book is that I think many parents, they make their kids take up what they do, right? So if you play golf, you make your kids play golf. You surf, you make your kids surf. If you're a programmer, you make your kids, do STEM and all that. But what I did, and I can't tell you it's because of wisdom at the time, I just have wisdom with hindsight, is that rather than making my kids take up what I liked, I took up what they liked. So my kids liked hockey, I took up hockey. My wife told me, do not be like a Silicon Valley father with a BlackBerry on the side looking up every once in a while. You get involved with your kids' life. They want to play hockey, you play hockey. I think she might have regretted that, but and so I carried that forward. My daughter took up surfing. Now, all 4 of my kids surf, and I can tell you, I've been to a lot of places. Done a lot of things. I have a lot of excitement in my life, but there is nothing in my life that brings me greater joy than surfing with my children. There is no greater feeling in my life than that. And so the wisdom here is that, as you parent, you might consider taking up what your kids like instead of making your kids take up what you like. It's a completely, I think, different orientation.
I'm curious, you thank a lot of people early in the book who read earlier versions
Yes,
of this book.
yes.
Your wife is among them,
Yes.
and your son, Nick.
Yes.
Any reason why the other 3...
They didn't read the book, so they're not in the acknowledgement.
They weren't interested? Did you offer it to them?
I offered it to them, but you want to be the acknowledgement, read the freaking book. I have a long lost relative from Hawaii who 30 years ago, this is the first time we've seen each other in 30 years. Lori's out here, and she helped me with some of my family history. One of my regrets in my life is that I never sat down with my parents and found out my whole history. I had to go to Ancestry.com and all this, and it was very difficult to figure out, when did my grandparents come, where did they go, and all that, because we just never ever discussed it. So one piece of wisdom I have for you is that before you or your parents are gone, get that down. I have big regrets about not knowing that. Um, so, so yeah, they weren't in the book because they didn't. But there's a chapter called Ohana where each child wrote a story about me and their interaction with me, which is very sweet. So, yeah.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Since writing The Art of the Start,
Yes.
I'm just wondering what your feeling is about how, being an insider, things have evolved in VC world, in development world, in terms of just quick profit, big scale, and raising the life of everyday folk.
Yeah. So I think that social media, which is basically free marketing, I think that alternate source of capital, crowdfunding. I also think that because so many things are open source and because of cloud-based computing, that it's much cheaper to start a company today. That most companies don't buy rooms full of servers anymore, right? They just use AWS or they use something, but they don't buy roomfuls of servers. And you don't go and buy a $1 million SQL license anymore. So I think the barriers to entrepreneurship are much lower. Now, the downside of that is there's many more people trying. But I'm a believer in the law of big numbers, that the more monkeys pounding on keyboards, the more likely you're likely to get Beethoven's Fifth or something, right? So I like more monkeys pounding on keyboards. So I think that's good. I'm a kind of optimistic person, and it's hard to be an optimistic person today, but I'm very optimistic.
And our last question?
First of all, thank you for a marvelous evening.
Where are you?
Backward.
If you had the $2 billion, how would you spend it?
If I had the $2 billion, how would I spend it? I'd give $100 million to each Democratic candidate. How's that? I would. My father taught me the concept of noblesse oblige, and I really do believe that there's a moral obligation to help people less fortunate. And I would love to be able to do that. I would love to give it away. I can't tell you I'm a Bill Gates and I'm going to cure cancer or something like that, but I really dislike a stacked deck and an uneven playing field. I dislike what's going on in America right now. That, one very, very tactical thing is if the concept of we only let people immigrate who are, quote, qualified, or what's the term that's used for people who are highly educated and want to live in America and all that, as opposed to people who just want to pick sugar cane. So, let's face it, if that standard were applied to my family, we would have never gotten in. Our qualification was we were willing to pick sugar cane. It's not like they were PhDs in computer science from Hiroshima and let's move to America. So I would not be here. I'd be working at Starbucks in Tokyo for something. Who knows where I'd be, or I might be dust because my family would have been wiped out in Hiroshima. So that's that kind of things offends me. And right now, this thing about we don't have appropriations to buy soap, toothpaste, and blankets for kids in detention centers, that is reprehensible, man. Someone should burn in hell for that. I just cannot. It's almost like the UN has to go to our border to see if we're, violating human rights. Did you ever think that you would be living in a country like America where we're the ones guilty of human rights? Holy shit, that is inconceivable to me. And so this is a long way of answering. You kind of know where I'd put my money. I buy everybody a toothbrush, nothing else. So I can't even wrap my mind around that concept that we treat people like that, and that, you know, that there's this, you really want to know how I feel, right? I mean, that, you know, somehow we think, oh, all these people, you know, they, from Guatemala, where I have 2 adopted children from, that, you know, they just want to come into America and live off hardworking Americans. You know, I mean, the fact is, if you're willing to walk across Mexico, seek asylum, take all these dangers, swim across rivers and all that, it's probably because Guatemala is much worse, right? I mean, it's not because, oh yeah, we got it good in Guatemala, but we just thought we'd go to America and, like, you know, pick sugar cane. I mean, I am reprehensible by that. I don't know. Want to know what I really feel? I don't know. I don't think we should end on that. I mean, it's kind of a negative. You know how I stand politically, right? There's no doubt in your mind, right?
Well, one more
What
Steve Jobs story then.
Has anybody been more political on this stage than me?
We have had lots of people who have voiced political opinions, but they mostly came from the political sector.
Oh. Is that a compliment or an insult?
No, it's your willingness to be open and speak your mind is welcome. That's what a stage like this is for.
Okay.
So thanks, Guy Kawasaki.
Thank you.